I clutched the edge of the vanity, my knuckles turning white as I stared into my own reflection. The soft morning light streamed through my bedroom window, casting a golden glow on the bridal gown hanging beside me. It was everything I had ever imagined: delicate lace sleeves, a fitted bodice and a flowing train. Today was supposed to be my day. But I could feel it, a storm churning beneath the surface. A gentle knock at the door. "Linda." I turned to see my fiancé Daniel peeking in. His face was unreadable, which was never a good sign. Daniel's emotions were usually on full display: joy, excitement, frustration. But right now his expression was eerily neutral. I set my brush down. "What happened?" He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "Your sister called me last night." My stomach twisted. "She's coming to the wedding, isn't she?" I already knew the answer. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Not just coming. He wants to walk down the aisle before you. In a wedding dress." Silence. A creeping horror slithered through me, and for a fleeting moment I almost laughed. It was ridiculous. And yet so painfully predictable. My sister Emma had always been my parents' golden child. She wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I got whatever remained. And now she wanted my wedding. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. And my parents? Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand over his face. "They're backing her. They think it's only fair since she's older and still unmarried." My grip on the vanity tightened. Fair. That word had never once worked in my favor. I took a steadying breath. "And what did you say?" For the first time since entering the room, Daniel's lips curled into a slow, almost mischievous smile. "I told them I'd think about it." I frowned. "Think about it?" Leaning forward, his voice dropped to a low murmur. "Linda, we're going to use this to our advantage." I blinked. Daniel was many things: kind, loyal, protective. But what most people underestimated about him was how calculating he could be when needed. "Do you really think I'd let this happen?" he continued, his tone sharp. "That I'd stand by while your sister hijacks our wedding for her own fantasy?" I swallowed hard. "Then why not shut it down immediately?" "Because if we refuse now, they'll just find another way to sabotage things," he explained, tapping his fingers against the bedpost. "But if they think they're getting what they want, we control the game." A shiver ran through me. I recognized that look. I had seen it before. When Daniel outmaneuvered a corrupt landlord trying to overcharge us. When he exposed a coworker attempting to blame him for missing reports. It was the look of someone setting a trap. A slow smile spread across my face. "Tell me the plan." Daniel leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "We let them believe they've won. Let Emma think she's having her moment. Let my in-laws feel important by contributing financially." He paused. "Then when the day arrives, we make sure she never gets the chance to walk down that aisle." A surge of something unfamiliar, vindication, excitement, power, bubbled in my chest. For the first time, my sister was about to experience what it felt like to lose. I exhaled slowly, letting Daniel's words sink in. It was a risky game. If we weren't careful, they'd walk all over us. But if we played it right, Emma would finally know what it was like to be blindsided. I met Daniel's gaze, my voice steady. "All right. Tell me exactly what we're going to do." His grin widened. "First, we give them just enough control to feel confident. Then we tighten the leash until they're too deep to back out." I nodded. "And my parents?" Daniel leaned back. "They'll follow her lead. If she pushes for something, they'll push too. So we let her push, just not where it actually matters." I exhaled. This would take patience. I had spent years learning that arguing with my parents never worked. They twisted everything until I was the problem, until I was the selfish, ungrateful one. But now we would turn their own tactics against them. The next evening, I sat across from my parents and Emma in my childhood home's living room. My mother sat primly, hands folded like she was at a royal meeting. My father leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Emma, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with excitement, her fingers tapping the armrest, her lips twitching with barely concealed smugness. "So," my mother began, smoothing her blouse, "Daniel told us he was open to discussing the arrangement. Have you thought about it?" I forced a tight smile. "Yes." Emma perked up as I glanced at Daniel. Playing my part, I hesitated just enough to make it seem like I was struggling. I don't love it," I admitted, twisting my hands in my lap. "But if it keeps the family at peace, I'm willing to make some compromises." Emma let out a breathy gasp like she'd just been knighted. My father grunted approvingly. "That's very mature of you, Linda." My mother nodded. "We knew you'd come around." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "I already have a dress picked out. It's not white, just a very pale champagne. So elegant. Mermaid cut, stunning. When I walk down the aisle first, people will think I'm part of the bridal party. It'll be symbolic, you know? A blessing from the older sister to the younger." My jaw clenched so hard it ached. A blessing from her to me. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder. "Hold steady." "That sounds interesting," I said evenly. "But if we're doing this, I have a few conditions." The room's energy shifted. My parents stiffened. Emma tilted her head. "Conditions?" she echoed as if the word were foreign to her. Daniel stepped in smoothly. "Just small things. Since we're making adjustments for Emma, we'll need help with costs. Venue upgrades, extra seating, catering." He paused. "We'll need financial support." My mother waved a hand. "Of course we'll help. We want this to be special for both of you." "Perfect," Daniel continued. "Also, since Emma will be in the procession, the dresses must coordinate for photos. We should get them from the same boutique." Emma's eyes sparkled. "Yes. We can go dress shopping together." I forced a smile. "That would be great." What I didn't mention was that my dream dress was already waiting for me at a boutique 2 towns over, far from Emma's reach. My father grunted. "Anything else?" Daniel nodded. "We'll also need a top-tier photographer and videographer. And finally," I added, tilting my head slightly, "if Emma is walking down the aisle first, she won't be a bridesmaid, right?" Emma blinked. "Huh." I kept my voice light. "If she's having her moment, she can't also be in the bridal party. That would be too much attention on one person. It's only fair." Emma hesitated. She hadn't expected to lose anything. But she had already gained too much to argue. She laughed, flipping her hair. "I suppose that makes sense. A small sacrifice for such a special moment." And just like that, she was out of my wedding party. Not a major victory. Not yet. But the first step. As we left, Daniel whistled. "That was something." I exhaled. "She actually thinks she'll pull this off." Daniel grinned. "She'll try. But by the time we're done, she won't even see it coming." Meanwhile, I stood in a simple yet elegant white gown, not my real dress, of course, that was safely tucked away, untouched by Emma's meddling. "Oh, Linda," she sighed, twirling once more. "I just know everyone is going to be so emotional when they see me walk first. It's going to be such a powerful moment." I forced a smile, biting my tongue so hard I could taste blood. Powerful? The only powerful thing about that moment would be her realization that she was never actually going to walk down my aisle. The sales assistant approached, her smile warm and inviting. "Are we saying yes to the dresses?" Emma nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. My parents are covering the cost, of course." I let out a soft, innocent laugh. "Oh, Emma, we should let them spoil us a little. After all, this is a once-in-a-lifetime occasion." She beamed, completely oblivious. My words had worked like magic. She truly believed this was her big moment. What she didn't know was that we were lifting her up just to watch her fall. Daniel had already taken care of everything. The dress order was never even placed. A few days before the wedding, Emma would receive a call informing her that due to an unfortunate mix-up, her gown hadn't arrived. Since she had refused to sign any paperwork, per Daniel's subtle suggestion, there would be nothing she could do about it. She'd be left scrambling at the last moment. I wondered just how powerful her moment would feel then. Next came the guest list. My mother had insisted on handling the invitations, pretending it was to make things easier for me. But we knew the truth: she wanted control. Daniel and I didn't fight it. Instead, we made a small adjustment before the final list was printed. My parents had ensured Emma's friends received invitations, including people I barely knew, while some of my closest friends had mysteriously been left off the list. Daniel discreetly brought this up to my mother, pretending to be on her side. "Linda's been so stressed," he had told her. I don't think she even noticed the changes. She ate it up, completely unaware that Daniel had already printed and sent out a second set of invitations behind her back. By the time she realized my friends were at the wedding, it would be too late. Meanwhile, Emma's friends? Their invitations would mysteriously never arrive. There was just one more setup left before the wedding. It was risky, but if it worked, it would ensure Emma ended up exactly where we wanted her on the big day. Daniel and I invited my parents and Emma over for dinner. Playing the part of the anxious bride, I pretended to have second thoughts. "I just don't want any surprises," I murmured, keeping my voice small, uncertain. "I know Emma wants this to be special, but I can't handle any last-minute changes." Emma scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Linda, you worry too much. Just trust me." "Oh, Emma." I already knew she had something planned. Walking down the aisle first wasn't enough. She wanted more. We just needed her to reveal it. So I took the bait. "You promise you won't do anything unexpected?" I asked. "No surprises? No extra speeches?" Emma smirked. "Linda, I wouldn't dream of it." She was lying, of course. We just had to wait and see what she was scheming, because whatever it was, Daniel and I would be a step ahead. As they left, Daniel pulled me into his arms, whispering against my ear, "You're doing great." I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. The stage was set. Emma had no idea that the wedding she thought she was stealing would never be hers. She was about to get exactly what she deserved. The morning of my wedding arrived with an eerie sense of calm. I should have been nervous, my stomach in knots. But as I sat in my bridal suite sipping coffee, I felt nothing but anticipation. Today wasn't just my wedding day. It was the day Emma would finally understand what it felt like to lose. The first sign of disaster for Emma came at 9:17 a.m. I was getting my hair done when my phone buzzed on the table. Glancing down, I saw a text from my mother. "Mom, Linda, we have a huge problem. Emma's dress is missing. The boutique says it was never ordered." My lips twitched. "Oh, Emma." This was the moment we had been waiting for. I took another slow sip of my coffee before responding. "Oh no. That's awful. What happened?" Her reply came instantly. "Mom, I don't know. Emma is panicking. She swears she confirmed the order, but they're saying she never did. Can you call them?" I let the message sit there. I wasn't about to rush in and fix a problem that had been carefully designed. 10 minutes later, another message. "Mom, Linda, please. This is a disaster." I finally responded. "I'm so sorry, but I can't get involved right now. I'm getting ready for my wedding. I'm sure Emma will figure something out." I could picture exactly what was happening. Emma standing in front of a mirror, half-dressed, her hair unfinished, screaming at my parents. My mother frantically calling the boutique. My father already in his suit, pacing, barking orders at whoever would listen. Meanwhile, Daniel and I were exactly where we needed to be. At 10:30 a.m., Daniel received a text from his brother. Bro, you need to see this." Attached was a photo of Emma's friends standing outside the venue, confused, frustrated. Their invitations had never arrived. Daniel's reply was simple. "Daniel, that's so weird. Maybe they got lost in the mail?" By now, my parents had to have realized something was seriously wrong. The guest list had been altered. Emma's dress had mysteriously disappeared. But they were too busy trying to fix the chaos to piece it all together. And then the final blow landed. At exactly 12:15 p.m. my father called me. I ignored it. At 12:17 p.m. he called again. This time I answered. "Dad," I said sweetly. "Linda," he said, voice tight, "we have a serious problem. Emma is at the venue but they won't let her in." I frowned. What do you mean?" "The security," he snapped. "They're saying she's not allowed inside." I sighed, shifting in my chair. "Oh, Dad, that's strange. I specifically told the venue that only invited guests should be allowed in. Maybe her name wasn't on the list." Silence. I knew he was trying to piece it all together. "You did this," he finally said, his voice low. I smiled. "Did what?" "You set her up." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. You know I've been so busy with wedding planning, I didn't even handle the guest list." "Mom did." Another pause. In the background I could hear my mother's frantic voice. Emma's furious screaming. My father's tone turned sharp. "Fix this. Now." I let out a small laugh. "Dad, I'm the bride. Do you really think I should be dealing with this right before I walk down the aisle?" He exhaled sharply. "Linda. Gotta go." I chirped, ending the call. I turned to Daniel, who had been listening the entire time, his grin wide. "She's outside?" he asked. I nodded. "Perfect." While I stood inside my bridal suite, serene and composed, Emma was outside, losing her mind. Security, already well briefed, remained firm. "I don't care what the list says," Emma shrieked. "This is my sister's wedding. Let me in." One of the guards checked his clipboard. "Ma'am, if your name isn't on the list, we can't let you in. Venue policy." He turned to my father. "Dad, do something." But for the first time in his life, my father was powerless. There was no proof. No emails. No agreements. Just his word against ours. "You're making a mistake," he warned the guards. But they didn't care. Inside, the music started and I stood at the chapel entrance, bouquet in hand, radiating peace. As my guests turned to look at me, whispers filled the room. People had heard. They knew. And yet, as I took my first step down the aisle, I felt something I had never felt before. Freedom. I was no longer walking in Emma's shadow. This was my moment. As I caught Daniel's gaze at the altar, I saw the pride, the love, the silent acknowledgement that we had done it. Outside, my sister was likely still screaming, but inside I was finally free. As the ceremony ended and Daniel and I were officially declared husband and wife, a wave of triumph swept over me. For once in my life, Emma hadn't won. She hadn't stolen something from me or turned me into an afterthought. But the real battle was only beginning, because outside, Emma wasn't finished. By the time we reached the reception hall, the atmosphere crackled with hushed whispers. Guests had either witnessed the chaos firsthand or heard about it through the family grapevine. Those who hadn't still sensed the tension in the air. My parents stood near the entrance, their expressions dark as storm clouds. They hadn't even congratulated me, but that wasn't surprising. Their focus, as always, was on Emma. I squeezed Daniel's hand, bracing for the next round. He grinned. "Oh, I've been waiting for this." We had barely reached our table when my mother stormed over. "Linda." Her voice was sharp, controlled, but her eyes burned with fury. I turned to her with the most innocent expression I could muster. "Mom, I'm so glad you could make it. Isn't it a beautiful day?" She didn't take the bait. "You humiliated your sister," she hissed. Daniel let out an amused chuckle. "How exactly?" "She was standing outside, crying in front of everyone," my mother snapped. "You set her up." Feigning confusion, I tilted my head. "Mom, I truly don't understand. We sent out invitations months ago. If Emma's name wasn't on the guest list, that wasn't my doing. Maybe you should ask yourself what went wrong." My mother spluttered, her eyes narrowing. My father cut in, his voice low but filled with restrained fury. That's exactly what I asked myself when security informed us she wasn't on the list. His piercing gaze met mine. And then I realized, you've been playing us this entire time. Silence fell over the nearby tables as guests leaned in to eavesdrop. My mother leaned closer, her voice shaking. You think you're so clever, don't you? Daniel smirked. We don't think, ma'am. We know. Realization dawned on my parents' faces. They had funded my wedding, fallen for every calculated move, and now Emma was outside, humiliated. My mother's lips trembled with rage, while my father's face remained cold and unreadable. Then, in perfect dramatic timing, the doors swung open and Emma stormed in. Gasps rippled through the room as she marched toward me. Her mascara was smeared, her eyes red from crying, and she was still in her everyday clothes. No dress. No grand entrance. No victory. Just raw anger. Her hands trembled as she seethed. You. I gave her a bright, polite smile. Oh, Emma. I wasn't sure you were coming. She let out a sharp, furious laugh. Are you serious? You left me outside. You ruined my dress order, kept my friends out, and now you're sitting here acting like I'm the crazy one. The room was silent. All eyes were on us. My mother reached for Emma's arm. Sweetheart, maybe we should. No. Emma yanked away. I want to hear her say it. I want her to admit it. I tilted my head. Admit what? Emma's eyes burned into mine. That you did this on purpose. I took a slow sip of my champagne, then set the glass down, leaning in so only she and my parents could hear. Emma, I said softly, you did this to yourself. She inhaled sharply. I smiled. You tried to steal my moment and it backfired. Her hands clenched into fists. You think you've won, she whispered. I leaned back. I know I did. Daniel chuckled beside me. You'll get over it, Emma. That was the final straw. With a frustrated scream, Emma grabbed a glass from a nearby table and hurled it at me. But it never reached me. Daniel, expecting her outburst, caught it midair. A collective gasp spread through the guests. Emma froze. My father seized her arm. Enough. My mother looked horrified, and then I heard it. The whispers. She's lost it. I can't believe she did that. She's embarrassing herself. For the first time in her life, Emma realized that no one was on her side. Not even our parents. Daniel carefully set the glass down and turned to my father. I think it's best if you take Emma home. For once my father didn't argue. He simply nodded, gripped Emma's arm and led her away. My mother hesitated, glancing at me, but I said nothing. After a long moment she turned and followed them. The doors swung closed behind them. I let out a deep breath, and then, in the most surreal moment of my life, the entire room erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, and as Daniel wrapped his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my forehead, I realized something. I was free. The atmosphere lightened after my parents and Emma left. For the first time in my life, I wasn't anticipating the next fight or guarding myself against another betrayal. I was married. Happy. Free. And Emma had been exposed. The reception carried on. Music played, drinks flowed, and laughter filled the room. I danced with Daniel, surrounded by people who truly cared about me. It was surreal. I had spent my entire life fighting for scraps of affection from my parents, wasting years trying to be enough. But in the end, I had been chasing something that never existed. I didn't need their approval. I was building a family of my own, with people who actually loved me. Emma and my parents, they weren't part of that anymore. And that realization was the most liberating feeling of all. The next morning, Daniel and I barely got 4 hours of sleep before heading to the airport for our honeymoon. As we waited to board, my phone buzzed. My mother. Daniel glanced at the screen. Don't do it, he said. Don't let them pull you back in. I knew he was right, but something in me needed to hear what she had to say. So I answered. Mom. A beat of silence. Then, "You've really done it this time." I sighed. "Mom, if you're calling to lecture me." "Your sister is devastated, Linda," she snapped. "You embarrassed her in front of everyone. How could you?" I let out a soft laugh. "Mom, are you seriously asking me that? After everything she did?" She scoffed. "She didn't deserve that level of humiliation. You should have just let her walk down the aisle. Would it really have hurt you?" And there it was, final confirmation. Even after everything, my mother still believed I should have stepped aside for Emma, that she deserved my moment more than I did. I exhaled. "You know what, Mom? I don't care anymore." Pause. "Excuse me. I don't care what you, Dad, or Emma think. I'm done." "Linda." "No," I cut her off. "I spent my whole life as an afterthought. But not anymore. This was the last time you tried to take something from me. And it didn't work. I won't be manipulated again. I won't fight for a place in your family. Because I don't need one." "Linda, don't be absurd," she said, her tone sharp and unwavering. "We're your parents, we're family. You don't just turn your back on family." I offered a small smile. "Then maybe you shouldn't have treated me like an outsider all these years." Before she could respond, I ended the call. Daniel studied me carefully. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly, and for the first time in my life, my answer felt completely true. "Yeah, I'm good." And I didn't feel hurt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't stuck waiting for their validation anymore. I was free. Daniel pulled me close, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, leaning into him. As we stepped onto the plane, I felt something shift, like a weight I had carried for years had finally lifted. This was it. A fresh start. A new beginning where I wasn't struggling to fit into someone else's mold. A life where my happiness came first. And as the plane soared into the sky, leaving everything behind, I realized one undeniable truth. I had finally won.